My father was murdered in 1990 during the same time that I was deployed to Iraq doing Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And, my thing to the legislature and to everybody else, if someone like me who's a victim, who lost a father early in my life, barely before, I wasn't even 21 when my father was taken, from me and my family at the same time, fighting for this country. So, it's not easy. I mean, it's something that I have to deal with daily, but what makes it better is the fact that I just feel like, even those individuals should have a second chance, and forgiveness a lot of times is good for me, but I think it's equally important for that individual that has been forgiven, and for these individuals to know that even if it's not a family member, but even if it's someone like myself or another legislature that they can see that, hey, believes in me, then I think they begin to believe in themselves, and that's where the change happens. But to keep the laws and to keep the things that we have in place, it really gives them no hope, and will put them in a place where they're just lost forever. And I just think that we just got to give individuals hope. And I think that maybe that's the reason why the good Lord placed me in the position that I am today, is to speak on the behalf, speak as a victim, and to show them that, hey, people can change, and people do make mistakes. And whether we realize it or not, or whether we admit to it or not, all of us are either one mistake away or one mistake past from being what some of these individuals are. Yes, it's hard. But at the end of the day, if we leave these individuals incarcerated forever, does that bring that family member back? No, it does not. If we stick a needle in their arm and send them on their way, does it bring that family member back? No, it doesn't. So at the end of the day, I think that we should try to find some place to where we can say that, hey, what you've taken away from me, you will never understand. But at the same time, we have to understand that we're taking away something as well when we do that. So I don't necessarily agree with the eye for an eye approach.
This is my sister, Nancy Bishop Langert, and her husband Richard, and she was pregnant when she was murdered, and the killer actually aimed for and shot at her pregnant belly. So he got charged with 3 homicides because intentional homicide of an unborn child was the 3rd count. And that is going to be the count that is relevant for my interest in the Jones v. Mississippi case, because the 2 sentences that the killer, in my case in Illinois, received for Nancy and Richard, those were mandatory life without parole sentences because he killed multiple people. And in Illinois, he was only 4 weeks shy of his adult criminal age. He was definitely found to be an adult, tried and convicted as an adult in Illinois. And because he killed multiple people, he was given mandatory life sentences. Well, the 2 mandatory life sentences for them were suspended in Miller v. Alabama in 2013. And so because these were mandatory, and so now we're in the process, it's 2020, and he still has not been resentenced for those, because he also had that 3rd count, which is the intentional homicide of an unborn child, and that was a discretionary life sentence, which is what they are now working on. The advocates are now, the juvenile justice reform advocate community is now working on these discretionary life sentences, where the judge did have a choice what sentence to give the offender, and still chose to, as in our case, give the offender another life sentence. NOVJM, the National Organization of Victims of Juvenile Murderers, advocates for victims to be heard from, protected, notified, kept safe, asked for restitution, make victim impact statements, all of the traditional victims' rights. And that's our primary advocacy. One of our major concerns over the years has been, however, that as the juvenile justice reform movement has set about to tick away at, going after certain practices in the criminal justice system, none of which our organization takes an official stand on. We simply support the right of victims to be heard in that discussion. And to have a loved one murdered is the most traumatic thing that can happen to anybody. To have a husband, a child, a sibling brutally murdered, it's devastating for your life. It is a trauma that has psychological and physiological impacts on people for the rest of their lives. And whenever I get close to, thinking about this murder, this loss in my life, my heart races. I'm already shaking. My throat is tight. This happened 30 years ago, and I'm still, I'm glad that I still feel grief and emotion for her, for Nancy and for Richard and for their baby. I'm glad that I still feel that close and that connected to it, but it's traumatizing every time that there's an attempt to release the killer in our case, because the killer in our case is quite not the typical juvenile murderer. He was under 18, yes, but he had none of the characteristics that you will often hear the juvenile justice reform advocates saying. He wasn't acting on impulse. He didn't have a disadvantaged life. He lived in a wealthy suburb to a great family. He had super grades. He had a wonderful life. Lived in a $3 million house, had every advantage, didn't act impulsively, wasn't in a gang. Nobody was telling him to do this. He pre-planned it and cold calculated this murder, this triple homicide, for the sheer thrill of it, and said it was for the thrill of it. In our case, we know that there are a range of offenders out there. We know that there's a range of culpability and a range of circumstances in details in every crime that vary widely. We just think as an organization that the courts should be able to look at them, at all of the factors, the victims, the offenders, the circumstances of the crime, and should have the widest range of sentencing options available to them